So Dan, thank you so much again for coming into speaking with us about WiLD. So I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself and the organization.
Sounds great. Let me just share my screen here and
Yes,
jump
please.
right in. Okay, is that working? All right. Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon or good morning from Milwaukee. Thank you to the Leading Change Network and Rowan, Anna, and so many of the people who are part of keeping the spirit of leading change alive. Just a couple of things before I dive in. I think first, one of the draws for me and continues to be in leading change and coming into these spaces is having the opportunity to both feel humbled by so much of the important work in organizing that's happening here in this country and throughout the world, and the many sacrifices and risks that are taken in doing that. Just randomly got put in a breakout with Carolina down in Tallahassee, Florida, who Jake and I and Anna and a number of other folks, Abel, had a chance to work with in January at CIU. And yesterday they voted to unionize the largest community college in the country. So yes, great to feel that. And also just what draws me to this space time and time again is really a source of inspiration, particularly during these times, which I don't know about you all, but for me, so easy and tempting to want to give into the ongoing struggle of how not to fall into a place of despair and feeling of isolation and hopelessness, particularly during these times. But to really draw on, and for me, many of the people on this call, it's great to see so many familiar faces have been a source of strength for me in this work and moving it forward. So, yes, so let me get sure my slide is working. There we go. So those of you who I don't know, looking forward to having a chance to connect with you more, maybe even in person. So just a little bit of the background on what calls me to this work. So I was raised in a small town in northeastern Wisconsin by a mom and dad, not looking like that anymore, but who taught me at a young age that living out what you believe in, living out your faith is more than showing up on Sunday morning to worship. That it's really about what you do with it in the world, how you act on it that matters. And for me, primarily saw that just by watching mom as a public school teacher. Later became, she looks sweet in this picture, but could bring and continues to bring a fierce sense of commitment and urgency to the work, particularly around reforming the mass incarceration system in this state and the work that she does in the prisons and out. And then dad found his call as a healer, and to this day is a doctor and has served people, particularly those who don't have access to healthcare in this state, in this country. At the time, had no intention. Organizing was not anywhere on my radar, trust me. It wasn't until I made a move after college down to Houston, Texas, where I can safely say my worldview was radically turned on end. Seeing the contrast between the world as it could be and the world as it was for so many, and having experienced, long story short, a window into some of the pain out there, and primarily feeling that and experiencing that through the relationships and love that I developed with this group of fourth and fifth grade boys and girls as I was living and working in the housing projects of Houston, Texas, counseling and supporting kids that were at risk of dropping out. And over the course of time, realizing that the problems that they were having in the classroom, probably preaching to the choir here, was something more than a behavior problem. You could literally look across the street where about 90% of them came from and saw something that I had never seen growing up with the privilege that I did. The gangs, the violence, the lack of a father, let alone any role model in their lives, and started to make sense of some of the statistics and things that I had read and learned about, like the pathway and the pipeline to prison. So wanting to do something about it, but feeling honestly a bit overwhelmed by the enormity of systemic poverty in this country and what to do about it, I ultimately found my way up to St. Louis, where I was introduced to organizing um, during a time when the city was going through similar struggles that Houston was, on the verge of becoming the murder capital of the country. And this is when I first was introduced to many of these practices that I know many of the folks on these calls have spent years developing in your own craft, in way of living and being and doing this work in the world. So yeah, we brought together 75 congregations, over 100,000 people, and took action on things like um, workforce hiring, where there were racist hiring practices in the city when they were preparing to build $500 million plus projects and not hiring the people that needed to be brought in and given those opportunities the most. So it was through that I not only found my own calling to this work, but became a believer in that those closest to the problem are also those closest to the solution, and saw as people learned how to organize, not only finding their own voice, but when they were able to put it in connection with others, finding power and a community that they could live out what they really wanted to see happen and change in the world. So that that led me on this journey for the last 20 years. Got an opportunity went out to the Kennedy School in '06. Spent 2 amazing years with Marshall and a number of other people dreaming big, studying social movements, be involved with deeply involved in Obama's first run for president, back when American politics was in a much better place. And ultimately brought me back here to Wisconsin. And yeah, spent years traveling and being in places. I see Ashraf on the phone. Had an opportunity during the Arab Spring to be in Syria with him and Nazreen Haj Ahmad, among others. And yeah, just to be exposed to something so much bigger, and seeing people who are hungry to do this work and to pass it on. And after a number of years of doing that, I don't know if anyone has ever had this experience, but coming back home and feeling like you're disconnected from your own community in a real way, certainly in the way that I experienced when I was doing this work in St. Louis. And I was also starting to see the world through these two little guys. These are my boys, Gabe and Leo. And was also starting to understand something I'd always heard growing up, but never truly was able to digest, which is when you start to see the world through your own children's eyes. And starting to ask myself, as their father, sorry, I'm getting a little choked up here seeing their pics, what was I preparing to send them out into? And yeah, I was just feeling, as I saw the homicide rate in the city of Milwaukee, where we live, continue to tick up, seeing the state of our public school system, seeing a government here in the state shortly after the third re-elect of Scott Walker, and a Republican legislature that was continuing to make decisions and from on high, not engaging the people who are struggling most in many of the communities that I care most about. So that was what brought me back to Wisconsin. And I ended up going on what I like to call the Wisconsin coffee shop tour. Spent several months. It was definitely not a lucrative venture. Highly caffeinated, and did about 300 one-on-one interviews and conversations with people from all corners of the state, to get a sense of was there a place in a group of people that were thinking big picture, that wanted to do things differently, that I could link up with. And actually found many, but didn't find an existing organization was doing the work that I thought was so needed. And that was combined with this lesson. I feel like we certainly learned most poignantly back in 2011, and we're continuing to learn in various parts of the country, that simple just mobilizing in moments of crisis is no longer enough to win. That we could actually mobilize, which happened here in 2011 during Act 10, and collective bargaining was taken away. where 100,000 people were on the streets of Madison day in and day out, and we still lost. So the WiLD project, Wisconsin Leadership Development Project, has been an effort to do things differently. And at the end of the day, to double down on our greatest resource, which I have always believed and continue to, are people, as a way forward, and giving voice to the so many communities that have been systematically locked out of the decision-making tables. And that's what the work, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that here, has been about for a group of us here for the last 3 years. What does it look like to become intentional, but identifying, training, and developing leaders, not just in existing organizations and people who are paid organizers, but so many of the people who I continue to believe are waiting on the sidelines, or one phone call away from being invited in to do this work. So these are a number of the communities. Also realized, even though sometimes Wisconsin gets pegged as not being a very diverse state, that there actually is a very rich diversity of communities here in the state. The ones that I wanted to bring in central to this effort. On the top left-hand corner is the Hmong community, the Hmong people who came over from Vietnam as refugees, now about 50,000 in the state. The Latinx community, we've got 11 Native American communities and reservations in the state. Young people tied into the Black Lives Matter movement. Small family farmers, something our state is known for. The environmentalists, activists working on public education, and higher ed, to name a few. So those were some of the communities, and particularly people, who emerged for me after doing all of these one-on-ones. And realizing one thing early on, when I got my own start, is we can't achieve what we're trying to right alone, and it was going to take building a team. So in doing that, I recruited a team, a core group of people who were in-kind in many cases by their existing nonprofit organizations, or in some cases were just volunteering, to be a part of WiLD for 1 year. And I was particularly looking for people who are open to learning, which I know sounds maybe straightforward, but as many of you know, is not always the case in people that have done this work. People that can make the commitment for the year, people that actually were connected to a constituency of people that were either currently being organized, or in many cases, there was the opportunity to do that. And then, of course, really wanting to draw on the diversity of the state, as I mentioned. So with the idea that then they, not myself, would be the ones who would go out and recruit their own people to come into the 2.5-day organizing workshops, primarily in teams, in groups of 5 to 10, where they could take an existing campaign that maybe had stalled and needed to be revived, to go deeper and broader with that, or in many cases, to just take a group of people coming together for the first time who are feeling urgency around doing something, and actually using the training as a way for them to launch a new organizing effort and be supported not by me, but by this core team of people who I was primarily working with and supporting. So just to give you a snapshot of year one, this was the fall of 2015, the founding core team got together, brought them through the organizing training and framework, and then they went out and started recruiting their own teams. And every 2 months, we kind of staggered these as a way to continue growing the WiLD, but primarily the snowflakes of so many of these leaders who are coming through. So in January, we had 47 folks, March, 65, 54 people in May. In July, had 90 folks come together. And then we did some focused kind of constituency-based trainings with public educators, public school educators, the Native community, and students organizing on college campuses. Also just want to highlight, I'd be remiss without doing this, a couple people who really served as anchors and rocks and sources of strength for me through this. Two better looking guys on either side of me, Jake Waxman and Abel Kano, and I don't know if Neka was able to join, but Neka Akubeze, who have been some of the pillars as far as the training of people coming through the workshops. And at the end of the first year, this was the other thing that emerged, was people, and something that I didn't anticipate. When people were coming into these training spaces, who otherwise had, for various reasons, been siloed off by organization, issue, or geography, and they had a chance to actually build relationships with each other and realize that at face value, the realities many ways couldn't look different. But as they got to know each other and connect and realize, particularly in light of who has power in the state and who doesn't, that there actually was a lot of common ground for exploring doing things together. And that's when we organized our first leaders assembly at the end of the first year, which ultimately resulted in a decision to organize around the state budget, which is done every 2 years here and is the main piece of legislation that funds public education, healthcare, among so many other things. And we thought this was one place to connect the dots and potentially achieve something together that we couldn't alone. So we took one aspect of the training, particularly around storytelling, which was one of the many learnings through WiLD. The more that we can align various aspects of this organizing framework with real action that people can take using it right away, not a year from now, but like right away coming out the other end, it just brings a whole other level of urgency from a learning standpoint, but also from going out and doing something with it. So yeah, we organized these one-day workshops across the state. We trained 282 people. And it resulted in, one of our main tactics was mobilizing people around these joint finance committee hearings. Was made up of the main decision makers on the state budget during a time when it was completely Republican led, by the way, including our governor. 875 people turned out, at the largest showing of really any group in the state, and resulted in, through result of a lot of people and organizations coming together, $600 million being put back into funding K through 12 public education. And then here's just a little snapshot. Some of you on this call may see yourselves in these pics. Various trainings and groups that we have during 17 and 18 had an opportunity to train and work with as they continue to bring in new people in organizing efforts that were wanting to get launched or go deeper and broader. And as a result, these first 3 years, we've trained 1,063 folks, 120 facilitators. So these are people who both recruited teams, but also came a day and a half before the workshops and were trained on how to facilitate their small group. Touched 311 organizations, and here's a cool statistic that actually 15% of that 1,063 are people that came through 2 to 6 times, which brings us closer to, I think, 1,500 participants. But yeah, just a sense of one, that people, it's encouraging that people wanted to come back and not run the other way, but two, just a deepening of their own practice as they brought additional people through this. So it's a little map of Wisconsin. You can see the spread. And just a couple of highlights of a few of the campaigns and things that emerged. Places like students of color organizing on University of Wisconsin college campus who were experiencing racism, who wanted to do something about it. And as a result of sending a team through WiLD, several teams, went back, and their theory of change was that they needed to elect their own people to take over student government. So they ran a slate of 20 candidates, increased voter turnout on campus by 58%, and got their entire slate in. The Hmong community up in northern Wisconsin, it was a crisis as a result of high school bullying, where a young Hmong student unfortunately took the life of a white student as a result of high school or bullying, and was being sentenced to 60 years as a minor. And we decided to organize the largest rally, 1,000 people, bringing together the Hmong and white community, and reduce this sentence, and also challenge the school district to reform their policies around bullying in the schools. Had a recent example in this last election. up in northern Wisconsin, Oneida County. State was running a referendum up there as a way to expand sulfide mining that was going to, at the end of the day, through all the research we've seen, like poison many of the waters and rivers up there. That is a lifeline for the people in that part of the state. And in a very red Republican district. And they went out, brought a team through WiLD, went back, and ended up getting a majority, about 2/3 in that election, and blocked that from happening. And we've had people run for elected office. Wanda, this last midterm election, Jeff Smith was elected to state senate, among others. And can't take complete credit for this, but a lot of our folks, including we trained the state party field team, among others, who were involved in the 2018 midterm elections. As a result, got ourselves a new governor, yay. And yeah, saw a record-setting turnout in the 2018 election. So it's a quick snapshot. Wish I could do real justice to all the people and the work that continues on. The people are continuing to grow and build. It's a couple lessons learned here, and then I'll. How are we doing on time, Rowan?
Oh, we're out of time. Like, finish your sentence.
All right. So, a couple of core lessons learned. I think some of these were relearnings too for me, of particularly in the training space, and just how important it is that people who are recruited to these trainings, by and large, are recruited to work on real things, real campaigns that leverage real work on the ground. And the engagement piece, knowing the challenge, and also when it happens, we're teams and people who come through a 1-day, 2-day, multi-day workshop. When they go back to do the hard work of actually applying it, when real intentional coaching happens, that the chances of their team and campaign succeeding go way up. Just both the challenge of recruitment, of getting people to not only come to a multi-day workshop, but to get the right people to come in, as well as when we've worked with a lot of different organizations, and oftentimes face the challenge of institutional change. People who say they may want to do organizing, but maybe their actions are not following suit, when real people in leadership from those organizations, not to mention larger numbers, come through, that it can actually begin to change the culture. Piece around application, again, follow-up, need for the relational piece of this, and the need and interest in people. And we're trying to do this now through a variety of different venues, bringing people back together to both connect, but also sharpen their own skills. So that's a couple things. Big learning. Learned this lesson the hard way for years. Did all kinds of organizing, campaign work, and never had on the front end thought intentionally about evaluation and bringing someone in that could help us really measure, monitor, and be a source for making tweaks as we move forward based on what we were learning. So brought a amazing woman in, Nicole Robinson, early on, who helped us think more intentionally about this each year. And then, yeah, I'm just gonna move on here. This is just a highlight of what we've done the last 3 months, and another run on the budget organizing front. But yeah, let me stop, and hope to have much more of a conversation here for the rest of the time.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Dan. If we can just give Dan a big round of applause for this great work that you did. So I'd just like to take the remaining time to open up for any questions and answers. If you have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand. You're getting lots of applause in the chat. Well, I'll get us started while people think about questions, Dan. So I think sometimes the hardest place is where to start. So I'm kind of curious to learn more. How did you go about finding the core team? How do you find in your experience, like, good people to work with? Because if you don't have the foundation right, it's practically impossible, right, to continue growing the way you did. So what tips or advice or lessons have you learned about that process?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was a quick fix on that, but in trying the quick fixes over time, I feel like I've learned that lesson the hard way too many times. Just taking, as I shared earlier, I mean, first several months, um, had about 300 one-on-one conversations with people. Part of that was my own learning and trying to like reorient myself to my home state, what was going on and where there could be some possibility to do some work together. But the other was, of course, I had my eyes, as Marsha would say, looking for those that had the glimmer in their eye, and people that I felt like could not only bring, my four criteria were openness to learning, could make the commitment, a big one around people, really seeing that they had a constituency that they could bring into these trainings and then use as a way to launch out the other end and really build an organizing campaign. So a couple thoughts on that one.
That's great. And did you do any testing, or was it more of a natural growth?
Yeah, I mean, each year on the core teams I've brought in, I feel like the initial core team training is like one initial test. I've had people after that drop out and say maybe this isn't, which is actually a good thing for all of us, right? Like being able to figure that out and find more opportunities to test people early on.
Great.
Olivia has a question. How do you find the funding for doing the trainings?
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, the fundraising. I didn't think this was going to happen, and definitely still not out of the woods yet on the funding front. But it was really challenging. I come back. I was literally running out of. My wife and I were trying to figure out how we were going to pay our each month, like our mortgage and like just basic food expenses, right? And yeah, it was really challenging with the local foundations, because they of course wanted to see something that had a track record, and like they were going to put their name and money behind something like that they knew was going to succeed, and this was new. So I just decided to get, we talk about building the road as we walk it, which is often unsettling, but just decided to launch right into it and train the initial core team. We had our first training. We were literally like going into the second training, just trying to cover the food expenses like a few days before the workshop, and ultimately had one foundation come in to put some seed money to it. And I think the real like game changer on the fundraising front was we got the program officers from the key foundations here to actually go through the full 3-day training, which was kind of a coup. I feel like it's so hard to even get like a half hour of many funders' times. And they came through, and I think I know they saw the power of it, because they each then made some substantial commitments to fund WiLD for multi-year grants. So yeah, again, not out of the woods on this one for sure, but that's how I approached it.
Great, thanks. All right, Drew had a question, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Hey, Drew.
Hey, Dynamic Dan. Thank you so much. My question was, what are some of your, I know you had to skip over some of the slide for towards the end, but I wanted to hear more about that metrics evaluation piece. Like, what are some ways you measure success beyond number of participants, basically? Number of people you train. What are some like policies passed, candidates elected, and how do you keep track of all those?
Yeah, really good question. We kind of reevaluated this each year and mid-year. But on the left-hand side here, the key learning questions that we surfaced. So, I mean, one was just, we did pre and post. Happy to share all this with folks if it's helpful. So we designed a pre and post survey for, are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah, a pre and post for people individually coming through, just to measure their own growth, a short period of time. And then our evaluator, Nicole, several months out, followed up, and probably with about 50 to 60 each year, had follow-up conversations. I mean, we were as well, but she was bringing the real lens around the more of the craft of evaluation and on the data side to measure how people were actually using it or not. I think the second big one, and this is for me where the rubber meets the road, is what was actually happening as a result, as far as successful campaigns and organization practice being strengthened. And each year our core team set goals. In this one you can see people were going to recruit from the core team, 36 total teams with a goal of 18 out of those 36 realizing that not all of them would be successful campaigns by the end of the year. So those are a couple of the key ones that we looked at.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Jeff, would you like to get on the mic?
Hey, thanks, Rowan. Thank you, Dan, for sharing all this. So my question was, how did you manage the tension of relating to groups and individuals who already had existing goals and campaigns versus WiLD developing its own goals and campaigns that maybe did not always align with